Welcome to the PERG Coffee Break. Today is a very important installment of the Coffee Break series, as we will discuss behind the scenes new mental health and suicide prevention initiative. Before I introduce our guests, I would like to take just a moment to thank our sponsors. PERG and all of the good work being done by this group is because of dedicated volunteers and like-minded sponsors. Our annual sponsors are Intella Event, Airy Rental, and Taylor & Taylor Insurance. Today's event sponsors are Lightgear and the Camera Division. Also, in a bit of news, our friends at Cinematography World Magazine are providing a free one-year subscription exclusively for PERG members. So look for the link in the chat for more information. Now, I'd like to introduce our guests for today's presentation. First is Lori Rubinstein. Lori is the Executive Director of the Behind the Scenes Foundation. Prior to that, Lori was the Executive Director of the Entertainment Services and Technology Association, or ESTA, which also is, of course, PERG. Lori, welcome.
Thank you.
Also joining us, great, thank you. Also joining us today is Taryn Longo. Taryn is the founder of the Mastery Studio and a somatic trauma therapist. She also has an additional background in depth psychology and a specialized certification in Jungian-based trauma studies. Her primary base of clientele are those working behind the scenes in the entertainment industry. Taryn, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, so before we get started, I want our guests to note there is a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. You're welcome to post any questions that you have throughout the presentation, and I will do my best to crowbar them into both Lori and Taryn's presentation. You're welcome to either ask those questions as yourself, or you can ask them anonymously, so it's completely up to you. So with that, Lori, I will hand the reins over to you and allow you to start your presentation.
Thank you very much, Paul. I do need someone to make me a co-host so I can share my screen.
You're good to go.
There we go.
Ooh,
thank you.
The voice of the ESTA God.
Thanks very much. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for coming today. I'm going to talk to you about the Behind the Scenes Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Initiative, and then Taryn is going to do the second part of the presentation. I'll be stopping frequently for questions, so don't hesitate to put them in the Q&A, please. You know, the concern about mental health in the industry really started long before the pandemic. People were under more and more stress, working longer hours, bigger projects, fewer resources, and it was really starting to take its toll. And it seemed like I was having more and more conversations about that with people for several years leading up to the pandemic. And so in the summer of 2019, Behind the Scenes brought together a steering committee to create a mental health initiative. And represented on that committee are labor, including members of the IATSE who are represented at the highest level, non-union labor, employers, large employers, small employers, and also social workers from all of the industry assistance organizations that so many of you are familiar with: Motion Picture and Television Fund, the Will Rogers Fund, the Actors Fund, Music Cares, the AFC in Canada. And then we also have therapists in private practice who specialize in our industry, such as Taryn. So the very first thing that we did was we did a survey of the industry. We needed to find out what was going on in your lives every day, what was causing the stress, the anxiety, what kind of resources did you have? And we had a tremendous response to that survey, and that has really guided the work of the committee over the last year and a half. So today I'm going to talk to you about our initiatives that we've released so far. And these include a 24/7, 365 peer-to-peer chat app, our entertainment industry therapist finder, free online behavioral self-assessments, easy to navigate resource links. We have a whole campaign to stop bullying, harassment, and intimidation, Toolbox Talks, and suicide prevention information. So let's get started. The first of these is our peer-to-peer chat app. And the idea behind this is you get home from a gig and it's, late at night, 1, 2 in the morning maybe, and you've got stuff on your mind, you really can't sleep. You don't want to wake up a family member or a friend. You're certainly not going to wake up your therapist at that hour. But what if you could get online and anonymously talk to people who understand what you do for a living, who understand the pressures, who understand the stress? So that's the idea behind this. And it's really very simple to sign up. You simply go to a website and you enter your email and you download the app. Then you get a login email from iRelate. And this app was developed at the request of people like special forces and first responders who also wanted to be able to talk with people that they felt really understood what they were going through. Once in the app, you set your own username, so you can be as anonymous as you would like. And if you see here the company tragedy masks, you want to click on those and that will take you into the Be Seen, Be Heard room. But you can also participate in any of what they call the global iRelate rooms. And this is for people in any industry and all over the world. This app is instantly translatable into 54 different languages.
Wow.
Once in the app, it works like any chat app, right? You just post what you want to. If you want to respond to someone specifically, you do @ If you're in a good conversation with another person or maybe a small group of people and you want to take it a little more private, you can create your own room and invite them into that room. So it's a great way. It's so hard sometimes just to talk to the people that are closest to you. It's a great way to talk to people who understand, but you can do it anonymously. And of all the resources I'm going to talk about today, the only one that has any charge is this one. It's 99 cents a month. So that's less than $12 a year to have a community you can talk with. The next initiative was the Entertainment Industry Therapist Finder. And we launched this because in the survey, people kept telling us how difficult it was to find a therapist who understood anything at all about the industry. They were tired of having to spend their first few sessions educating their therapist and having therapists make completely unreasonable suggestions like, well, if you're stressed, just take an hour off in the middle of the afternoon and go for a walk, that kind of thing. So we were able to find a small nonprofit had run an online therapist finder for many, many years, and they allowed us to customize the finder in 2 ways. One was in the questions that are asked of a therapist when they register, and we could make sure that the questions were covering things important to our industry. Like, do you see people at times other than 9 to 5 during the week? Will you see people nights and weekends? Can someone book an appointment on their phone so that they don't have to make a call if they're on set or backstage or that kind of thing? They can just do it by texting, etc. So we did all that. And the other thing we did was we were able to set the criteria by which a therapist could register to be listed. And we made it really simple. Either they had to have previously had clients in the industry, so in effect, they've already been educated by those clients, or they had to have worked professionally in the industry themselves. And we've discovered that it's a very popular field for people who used to be in our industry. Lots and lots of people have made second careers as mental health professionals. So there are 2 searches you can do, actually 3 when you go into the finder. One is what we call a simple search, and you can either search based on distance from your home, or you can search by state. And especially now, when almost all therapy is happening as teletherapy, I strongly encourage you to search by state because it widens the pool of available therapists. All that matters is that they're licensed to practice in your state. You can search by things like concerns. So do they specialize in marital problems, family issues, anxiety, depression, substance use, those kinds of things, and you can narrow it down that way. Of course, you can search by insurance. We all know, though, that most insurance plans don't have very good mental health coverage. They don't have very many therapists. The ones they have are often not accepting any new clients. So I would encourage you, if you find a therapist that you think is a good match for you, even if they don't take your insurance, call them up and ask them if they'll work with you on a sliding scale. Most therapists are doing that right now. And in fact, if you go to their website, they have a little screen that'll pop up that says, contact us. The other search you can do is what we call the advanced search, and you can really drill down on this. You can look at what kind of theoretical approach they use, what was their education, what treatment method, what credentials they hold, how do they identify from a gender standpoint or a racial standpoint. so you can really narrow it down and find a therapist that will work with you. Paul, I'm going to stop and see if there are any questions.
One of the questions we have is what exactly is a sliding scale when it comes to either payment? Obviously, insurance is one thing, but sliding scale is a direct payment. What does that mean, Lori?
Taryn, can I put it over to you?
Yeah. It just means there's a range that the therapist will accept. So say their typical rate is $125 an hour, they might have a sliding scale from 90 to 125, depending on what your financial situation is. So usually it would be predetermined, though. You would have that conversation about what is a comfortable within that scale that they allow, what's a comfortable number for you. And then you kind of decide on that, and that's what you pay moving forward.
Thanks.
Great, thank you. And then Lori, I mean, I don't know if this is the exact right place to ask this question, but with these two initiatives here, are these only available for people that work behind the scenes or in the entertainment sector, or are these open to family members and others?
Good question, Paul. Thank you. So the peer-to-peer chat ad is really designed strictly for the people who are working in the industry. But the Therapist Finder and all of the other initiatives, programs I'm going to talk about are absolutely designed for you, for your families, for your peers, for performers, everyone in the entertainment industry.
So really not unlike, BTS in general, right? I mean, like my company is a manufacturer of product, and yet all of my employees would qualify if they needed something from BTS, or in this case, from the mental health initiative.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As with their families, etc. Yeah.
Great.
Definitely. Anything else?
That's it for now.
Okay, I'm going to keep going on. The online behavioral self-assessments are completely anonymous, and they are a way to sort of check in on what you're feeling. And especially right now, so many of us are feeling things that either we've never felt before, or certainly to a degree that we've never felt before. And it's a good way to check for yourself or for someone you care about. And these are very straightforward. There are, we just skipped a slide. Let's see if I can go back. Oh, it dropped a slide. There are about 13 different assessments that you can take. There's a generalized assessment if you're not quite sure how to characterize what you're feeling, but there's one for anxiety, for depression, for substance use, for an eating disorder. You can take as many of these as you want. They are totally anonymous. You will be asked some basic demographic questions just for us to get a sense. We only know that at the end of a month, X number of people have perhaps taken the anxiety screen, and we have a general sense of demographics, and we know how many who've taken that who have shown signs of anxiety. And this helps us to understand what people are going through and to focus our work. Once you get into it, you'll be asked some very, very basic questions. This is for anxiety screen. Are you having trouble sleeping? Are you having trouble concentrating? These kinds of things. And then once you answer those, oh, these got reversed. So these are the different ones that are available to you. You can see, and again, you can take as many as you want. And at the end, it's going to say, perhaps you're doing really well, or perhaps maybe, it looks like you're suffering from anxiety. And here's what anxiety is. And one of the things we've learned about these is that taking it will give you a vocabulary for what you're experiencing. If you're having a hard time talking to someone, whether it's a friend, a family member, maybe it's a mental health professional, if you're having a hard time verbalizing what you're feeling, just by taking this, it can give you some language to help you describe what's going on in your life and how you're feeling. And that will help someone to help you. Now, this will then lead you to resources. And as our committee was researching these resources, we realized that it quickly became overwhelming, especially if you're in any kind of distress. You can just start going down rabbit hole after rabbit hole on the internet, and it gets to be too much. So what we've done is created some really easily navigable resources, one set for the US and one set for Canada. And they're very simple. Here are the US pages, and you can see they're just grouped into obvious categories. Your 24/7, 365 hotlines, suicide intervention, information about anxiety, depression, etc. And when you get in it, it's going to give you immediate contact information, whether that's a phone or a website. just some really basic information about 1 or 2 sentences about what the site does. And then you'll notice these 2 icons here. One says knowledge, and that means that that site provides a lot of good information about whatever the subject matter is. And the tools ones means that they just take it 1 step farther, and they really actually offer some training, some skills building to help you cope with whatever it is, or if you're assisting a loved one. Paul, I'll stop again for a moment and see if there are any questions before I go into the Stop Bullying campaign.
At this point, no attendee or audience questions. So I think you can just have at it.
Okay. The survey also told us that bullying, harassment, intimidation were also a major issue in our industry still. And this ran across all ages, all areas of the industry, from live to motion picture and television production, across all genders, across all racial identities. It's still a major problem. So we've launched a bunch of tools to try to help people start to fight this. And the first is to make people aware of the words and the actions that can cause harm to others. A lot of times people just aren't aware of it. They're not thinking about it. So we have these 2 posters available on the website. One's a really simple one with a QR code that would then lead you to the more in-depth one. We've done very simple designs on all our posters, so they're easy to print out on a printer in a production office or a home printer and put up. We've created a document for people who are targets of bullying to try and help them deal with this, and to give them some ideas of ways that they can respond, of things that they can do. And we've also created a document for bystander intervention. If you witness bullying and harassment, what can you do to step in? What are some techniques for intervening? And we've created a general informational pamphlet based on sort of four key things. Be informed about what bullying and harassment are. Be aware of them. Be aware, be alert to what's going on around you. Show support for the target, and then what kind of action you can take. And this is all downloadable from the website. And finally, if you're a small employer and maybe you'd like to adopt a policy, but you don't have a big HR department, you don't really have the time to do the research, we've done basic research for you to create a sample employer policy. And of course, you do need to check with local, municipal, state laws to make sure you're in compliance. But there's a really good template there that you can follow.
Lori, I think it's so interesting. And I know you and I had some conversations leading up to today's coffee break. You know, I have an 11-year-old son who's active in the anti-bullying world. And it's something that, you know, we as parents really are looking at from their age group, right? From, you know, children to teens and young adults. But you found that there was not necessarily an epidemic, but a tremendous amount of bullying in your research and through the surveys.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's a cultural thing in our industry. It's, you know, bullying includes things like, well, I worked 18 hours yesterday. Why can't you work 18 hours today? Or I worked when I was sick. Why can't you work if you're sick? Or, you know, bullying people to go out for a drink after the call, or if they don't want to, or it just takes on so many different kinds of forms. And as I said, across all different areas of the industry, ages, genders, etc., it is still unfortunately very, very widespread in our industry. But people are afraid to talk about it. They're afraid if they raise it, they'll lose their job or that type of thing. So it's really all about creating a safe atmosphere at work where that kind of behavior is not tolerated. And I know there are a lot of company owners, managers on this call. It starts with you. It starts at the top. You have to create that atmosphere where it's not tolerated and where the victims are heard and supported.
Yeah, I mean, I could certainly see in a freelance environment, you know, you're talking about a group of individuals who are using networking as their key to getting job after job after job. And I think it's very easy to just succumb to whatever pressures or bullying or comments are being made because you want to make sure you get that next gig.
That's right. That's right. And that it takes a huge toll on people. It takes a huge toll. And one of the things that we're seeing, which I think could be characterized as bullying, is as people return to work, we're seeing people who don't want to comply with the safety protocols. and who are giving those who do a hard time. They're mocking them, whatever it might be. And that's a big issue. And it needs to be nipped in the bud. It needs to be dealt with. I've heard some horrific stories of occurrences around the country where someone who didn't want to comply has made life pretty miserable for those who are following the protocols. So it's really important. I know that the IATSE has an absolute no tolerance policy on it. And I think, you know, people need to really think about and convey what their policy is, because that kind of thing, it's hard enough for everyone to comply with the protocols. You know, they're going back to workplaces that look and feel entirely different than the ones they might have left, whether it was in March or in the fall. So that in itself is stressful for people. Complying with everything is stressful, remembering to comply, but then having to deal with someone bullying them on top of that can really be too much.
Yeah, wow.
So another way for people to fight this, we've created something called Toolbox Talks. And that's because it's really important that language about psychologically safe spaces and respectful workplaces are incorporated into everyday work life. Almost everyone is doing some sort of a toolbox talk, a stand-up talk, a safety briefing, a new employee introduction, whatever you call it, there's something that's usually conveyed. And we want language about mental health to become a natural part of that. Doesn't have to be a lot, even a few sentences will go a long way towards setting the tone of the workplace. But we know it's a really tough subject for people to talk about. You're not a mental health professional, you're not going to be as comfortable talking about it. So what we've done is written some really simple language for you to choose from. So if you go to the website, the first thing you'll see is sort of our argument about why it's important to talk about mental health and psychological safety. And these are really, you know, let's say you work in a company, you're a manager and you want to incorporate this, but maybe you have to convince management that it's okay. These are some arguments, if you will, that you can use to help your case. You know, there's no question that good mental health improves productivity, and all companies are interested in productivity. So these kinds of things. But then when you get into the meat of this, what we've done is identified a number of key points. And under these, we've identified talking points. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time showing you, letting you read the slides because they're all available on the website. But what we've done, for example, under how to talk about mental health, we've identified really two key things you should include. And the idea is you come in and you look, oh, look, here are 4 different sentences I can pick to talk about it. Uncomfortable just saying stress can contribute to accidents. That's what I'm going to incorporate into mine. And you go through and you pick out the topics that are pertinent to your workplace and the language that you are comfortable with. And if you want it already done for you, we've even pre-scripted some talks. These are roughly 90 seconds to 2-minute talks. And they were done by a number of different people in a number of different areas of the industry. So hopefully they really sort of work for everyone. But again, the idea is you go in, take a look at them and find one you're pretty comfortable with. Feel free to change it up. Feel free to put it on your own words, but you can use it as a bit of a guide, a template. So it's really important to start incorporating language, especially now when people have gone through so much over the last year. Everyone's mental health has been pushed to the limit. So let them know as they're coming back to work that they're coming back to an environment, to a workplace that is concerned with their mental health. I'll stop again, Paul, and see if there are any questions.
Yeah, no questions. But Lori, I feel that this is, a day on set. You're seeing or hearing from maybe the ADs on what today's tasks are going to be, and there's usually, a conversation about set safety. But this is something that the department heads could take on, on the liftgate or, in the trailer to talk to their team specifically about, as an addendum or as a built on for whatever the set safety protocols are.
Absolutely. We'd love it to be at all levels, whether it's, just a group head, a department head, a steward, a manager, a supervisor, all the way up and down the chain. If people start using this language, it will help to change the culture.
And that's really what we're talking about, right? Is cultural changes.
Absolutely. We are absolutely talking about a cultural change. And And we know from experience that cultural changes will take generally 10 to 15 years in an industry to happen. But what we believe is the pandemic has really speeded this one up a lot, because as I said, everyone has dealt with a mental health issue of some sort, whether it's a mild depression or serious anxiety. We've all been more open to it in the last year. And I think people are more willing to talk about how they're feeling. So I think we've compressed the time frame for this culture change, and making a change as people return to the workplace can go a long ways towards that.
No, I mean, that's incredibly positive, and I really sincerely hope that that is the case, that we've compressed that time frame. I mean, it's unfortunate it took a global pandemic and a year of not working to do that, but right? I mean, whatever it takes.
Absolutely. Well, let's capitalize on the negative and make
Yeah.
something positive out of it. Okay. And just a few things to remember as people are returning to work. In addition to the mental health safety, if you will, people are out of shape physically too. They haven't been doing their jobs for a year, maybe a little longer. Their muscle memory may be gone. Things that they would automatically check without a second thought, safety protocols, might not be so automatic anymore. They have to remember to check them. Just being around people, if someone's been very isolated, just being around people is going to be hard. It's going to produce anxiety. Complying with all the safety protocols, as I mentioned, can be anxiety producing. So check in on people more frequently. Check in on each other. Encourage them to check in on each other. How are you doing? Everything okay? No, this is hard. You know, what's going on with you? Let's make this return to work as easy as we can on people. And remember, things are going to take a little longer, right? Because
sorry, go ahead, Lori.
no, I say they're relearning their job, and they've got these extra levels of anxiety as well.
You know, it's the one thing in my career with our clients here at Lightgear, the way that I start every conversation is, how are you doing? How's the family? Like, it's always about the check-in. And I've noticed that so many dear friends and clients of mine, it's the same response. You know, I'll pick up the phone and it's like, dude, how's the family? How are things? How's everybody at the office? So that check-in has almost become second nature. And I think that's so valuable, because so many of us work in such a tight environment that we truly care for one another. And I think, you know, that's where this should come from. And I think, you know, continuing this post-pandemic would be another way to really make this sort of a standard anymore, right? A standard part of our language.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, it's really important, especially now. Okay, so the next part I'm going to talk about is the Be the One to Help Save a Life, which is a suicide prevention campaign. And this is really geared towards, what do you do if you are concerned about someone, you think someone is at risk? This campaign is actually run by the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and its partners. So the first thing, of course, is to know the warning signs of suicide. And I'll get into these in a moment. What I want to show you is that these posters are available on the website. Again, very simple design in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and French. You will notice 2 English version ones, and that's because the US version references the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and the Canadian version references Crisis Services Canada. So make sure you get the right one. So what are the warning signs? Well, a lot of them are really obvious. Someone's talking about killing oneself, but maybe they're not quite as obvious. Maybe you come across someone and you see on their computer that they've been Googling ways to self-harm, looking at whatever it may be, drugs, guns, etc., referring to others being better off without them. And there's a lot of stuff that's really tough right now to separate out, if you will. Feelings of hopelessness, of shame, or being a burden to others is tough, because people who have always been able to provide for themselves and their families all of a sudden might not be able to. And so there's a lot of guilt and a lot of shame and a lot of pain that can go with that. So you want to be really aware of what's going on, of checking in with people on a regular basis. Of course, the use of alcohol or drugs are a big issue in our industry anyways. So really important to keep an eye on that. One of the things that people miss the most, frankly, is the wrapping up loose ends. And a common one in our industry is giving away your tools. If someone is giving away their tools, they either better be retiring or moving to another industry, because if they're not, find out why. I have been on too many of these presentations where someone has told me a story exactly that. Someone started giving away their tools and no one picked up on it. So you want to be alert to these things, these kinds of things. It can make all the difference in the world. So what do you do if you're concerned about someone? Well, you want to, especially now when you're socially isolated, you want to just be aware of changes in frequency, intensity, or duration in how they're thinking, feeling, or behaving. And one of the ways to do that, of course, is to keep an eye if there's someone who texts a lot. Has the tone of their text changed? Are they texting you at odd times of day from what they usually do? What kind of posts are they doing online? Just keep alert to those kinds of behaviors. But there are essentially 5 steps that everyone agrees are the right steps to take, if you will, to try and keep someone safe. You want to ask, be there for them, keep them safe, help them connect, and follow up. But what do those really mean? How do you help? How do you ask? Those posters, by the way, are available on the website, as is a little wallet card you can download. Most people think that asking will encourage someone. All of the research shows that that's not the case. Asking does not put the idea into someone's head. And in fact, what it does is it gives them permission to talk about what's bothering them. It shows that you care and it lets them open up. There aren't any magic words for you to say. You just want to use words that feel honest to you. And everything I'm going to cover in this next section is online. You can download it as a PowerPoint or a PDF. So I'm not going to get into the details of every slide. I just want to give you a flavor for what's there. Right now, during the pandemic especially, pay really close attention to anyone you know who is struggling or has struggled in the past with any kind of emotional distress. Make sure you reach out to them. Don't wait for them to reach out to you. You want to trust your observations and you want to reflect back to the person you're talking to what you're hearing from them so that they know you're really listening. You know, you seem sad to me. Are you thinking about hurting yourself? Reflect back how you're viewing what they're saying to you. Always ask open-ended questions because you want to get them talking. The more you can get them talking, the more they'll unburden themselves, and also the more you'll learn, and that knowledge can help you understand how to help them. Listening is every bit as important as asking the questions. It's key. And you always want to take their answers seriously and don't be judgmental, don't dismiss or contradict. But this first one is a really tough one because for so many of us, our reaction would be, well, I think you should live because, or I want to live because. But you've got to put the focus on what their reasons would be. Help them discover what their reasons to want to continue living are. Again, ask follow-up questions so that they have to answer something back to you. If someone has started down the path of taking their own life, they've taken the drugs, the gun is loaded, you have to call immediately for help. You have to call 911 because it's all about saving their life. So, you know, but otherwise there are lots of different things you can do to try and help the person short of that if it hasn't reached that crisis. You need to be there for someone, but don't commit to something that's unrealistic for you. We heard from people in our survey, a lot of people felt they weren't strong enough to help someone through a crisis. That's okay. If you don't think you can do it, that's fine. But don't just walk away. Find other people who can step in and be there for that person. Don't just walk away and pretend they're not going through it. We asked a question in the survey that said, what would prevent you from helping someone? And the responses were things like, wouldn't know what to say or do, afraid I would make things worse, wouldn't know where to send them for help, and am afraid I would hurt my relationship with that person. And that got the highest percentage of responses. You know what? If that person's not around anymore, you don't have a relationship to worry about. You don't have a relationship to take care of. So get them through it, and then there's time to mend the relationship after you've gotten them through the crisis. And in fact, if anything, they're going to recognize that you were the person who were there to help them through the crisis, and your relationship will probably end up stronger. And if it doesn't, at least you've saved a life. You want to check in with someone frequently. When you do, you want to make sure you're really present. Try and do a video call. It tells you a lot about the person. How do they look? Do they look like they get up and take a shower and get dressed? Are they eating well? Are they so antsy that they can't sit still and talk to you? What do their surroundings look like? You can learn a lot from a video call, but make sure that you're present. Don't be, playing games on your phone or watching TV or something while you're talking to them. Be fully present for them. They're going to want you to promise confidentiality. You can't do that because you do have to get them to help. So that's a critical thing. The main thing is to put time and space between the person and lethal means. Try to diffuse the situation. If you're present with them, then ask to hold the gun, ask to hold the drugs. If you can't be in the same location as them because of social distancing, ask them to put them somewhere where they're harder to access, separate the guns from the bullets, etc. Or try to get them out of the house for a while. Invite them to join you for a cup of coffee or even a walk. Just put some time and space between them and whatever those lethal means are. You need to try and help them connect to professional help. We're not asking you to be the therapist. We're asking you to care for someone until you can get them to professional help. Want to find out who they're comfortable accepting help from? It might be a family member, a friend, maybe it's a clergy person or a doctor, a mental health professional. And if they respond negatively at all to getting help from a mental health professional, ask why they feel that way. Because, maybe they had a bad experience with a therapist. Well, explain to them they don't have to see the same person. They can find someone new. Excuse me. So this is really important. You want to really stick with them while they make that first contact. Offer to be there with them. If they don't want to do it, tell them you're going to do it, but explain to them who you're going to call and what you're going to say, so you're not going around them. You want to work with them to develop a safety plan if you can get them through that crisis. Ways for them to experience, to understand and to recognize when they're sort of spiraling down, and what to do in those moments. Who should they call? Have a list of names and phone numbers by their phone that they can reach out to if they're starting to go into crisis again. That's really important to get them prepared. And finally, you want to follow up. You want to make sure to check how they're doing. And it's really, it's all about the frequency in this case, not as much about the quality. You just want them to know you're still thinking about them. So it's fine to send a text or just to leave a message. Give a call, obviously, if you can, but you want to make sure that you continue to reach out after the crisis has passed. And finally, if you help someone through this, it's really tough. So you want to make sure you have a support network in place for you, because it will take a lot out of you. So you want to make sure you're taking care of yourself. So just to recap, make sure you know the warning signs. Don't wait to learn those. Learn those now so that you recognize them when you first see them. Know the 5 steps to take to help save a life, and spread the word to others that this information is there. And I want to let you know that everything is available online at btshelp.org/mental health. I think Harry was going to put that in the chat. You can email me at mh@btshelp.org with questions, with ideas. And I just want to mention before I hand it over to Taryn that yesterday we launched mental health first aid for the industry. This is a 3-year certification. It was developed in Australia and it's now in 24 countries around the world. And you'd know what to do if you saw someone with having a panic attack or with a broken leg or whatever it might be. Most people know some basic first aid. Well, what about first aid for people who are dealing with mental health issues? And the idea is that in this class, you really get an understanding of mental health and substance use issues and how to work with people and how to get them to help, to assistance. The class is 2 parts. There's about a 2 to 4 hour self-study portion that you complete prior to a live virtual instructor-led class, which takes about 5 hours. And we are offering these at a variety of dates and times on an ongoing basis. So you'll find them on the website posted through the end of May, and we'll be adding new classes monthly. If you are an IATSE member, you can apply for reimbursement through the Training Trust Fund once you complete the class. And we do have a limited number of partial and full scholarships available for those who are not eligible for that reimbursement. So I would encourage you to go to the website and take a look at the class. We've had over 100 people sign up in the first 2 days. So it's a really wonderful thing. And it would be wonderful to have on every set, every crew, in every workplace, at least one mental health first aider. So I'll stop before we go and just see if there are any other questions on my portion.
I've just got two questions. One, that the information on that first aid class, Lori, is that on the btshelp.org site?
It is. You can go to btshelp.org/MHFA for mental health first aid.
First aid, great. And then just going back to the suicide prevention, you had put up a couple of the posters early on, the Canadian one, the US one. If somebody were to call a suicide hotline, does that mean that the person on the other end of that hotline taking that call automatically calls the police and dispatches them to your location?
Absolutely not. And that's a really commonly held myth. And I got the answer to that. I did a presentation, maybe 6 months ago with the Executive Director of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, Dr. John Draper. And I asked John that exact question because I had been asked it many times. And he said, no, the hotline, the only time the hotline will call the police is, as I mentioned, if they believe that person has already literally started down the path of taking their life, they're holding a loaded gun to their head, or they've already taken an overdose. Otherwise, no, they will do everything they can to work with you and not to call the police.
Great.
Taryn, you ready?
Yes. And I would like to add to that, that the people who are on the other end of that hotline are oftentimes people who have either struggled with suicidal thoughts themselves, or have lost somebody or almost lost somebody to it. And they're really empathetic and really well-trained, oftentimes, people. And that phone call can help kind of dissipate, kind of bring down that really intense feeling of wanting to hurt yourself, just that call itself. Okay, so why does a trauma lens matter? So I'm a somatic trauma therapist. Let me just give a little bit of background on what I do first, so it makes a little more sense where I'm coming from. I'm a somatic trauma therapist, and that's a body-based approach to trauma healing. It's an approach where we work directly with the nervous system. So trauma is held in our nervous system. So when we are experiencing symptoms of PTSD, oftentimes that is our nervous system in a threat response. So somatic trauma healing works directly with that nervous system to regulate it, bring it back into a non-threatened space, a place where it feels safe. So right now, we are in a time of trauma, and it's still unfolding. It's not even post yet. We are still in the unfolding trauma of the pandemic, and the industry itself is still really, really impacted. So it's an ongoing trauma that's unfolding. And suicidal thoughts are higher in those who are dealing with trauma and PTSD. Lori's in charge of my slides, so we're gonna try to we get into a flow, don't worry. So what we're gonna cover here is we're gonna reframe suicidal thoughts through that somatic lens, so through the nervous system lens. And I do want to say that this is the modality, this is the approach that I take, that I work with. There are many approaches to working with trauma. There are many different types of therapists. So I'm coming from a somatic place, and that's the lens that we're going to look at this through. And the reason that's helpful is because it's a body-based approach, a root, like a bottom-up approach. It kind of can get straight to what's going on with that anxiety and depression and PTSD, rather than needing to really unpack all the story and feelings around it. It's sort of like targeted, and that's why it's very useful as an immediate tool to use, as well as ongoing healing. So we're going to reframe suicidal thoughts through the lens of the nervous system. We're going to talk about what trauma does to us, and some tools for anxiety and depression, some immediate and ongoing tools for self-regulation, and we'll talk about what self-regulation even means when I say that, and then we'll take a look at resilience and the role that plays in all of this. Reframing suicidal thoughts, I would say that this is one of the more important aspects of it to me, because what I experienced from my place working with a lot of folks in the industry is that oftentimes, even just whatever brought people to the industry, often there is trauma in the background. It's a unique industry. It's a different kind of, the different hours. There's a different kind of family vibe to things. It's a whole other, it's like its own thing. And oftentimes people come into the industry and want to, like, they're interested in these different kind of lives and more creative kind of endeavors. And there was trauma in the background. Trauma can be like a deviation from the normal path. So then when you add a traumatic time onto it, which we're in right now, you add a lot of overwhelm. So suicidal thoughts are actually really, really common when you're dealing with a ton of overwhelm, you're dealing with trauma. They don't mean that you want to end your life oftentimes. It means very often that we want to end the pain that we're experiencing. It's that the pain is becoming so overwhelming that it's hard to bear. And that's when our self-defense system can kick in and say, no more pain, let's just end it all. But really, at the core of it is that we want to live. We just want to live without the pain that is too much to bear. So it's really important to understand that it's totally normal to have these thoughts arise, and that really at the core of it, we're actually trying to take care of ourselves. As counterintuitive as that sounds, it's really what we're trying to do. Especially right now. Oh, can you go back? Sorry. Thank you. Especially right now with the industry being so impacted by the pandemic, and so much of it is out of our control. Trauma is linked with powerlessness and a sense of helplessness. It's when there isn't a sense that we can control the outcome. And that's really, really important, especially for this group here today, because a lot of you, as I know, are company owners who have a lot of employees that are impacted too. So when you're impacted yourself, but now you also have people you care for and that you provide their wages, that how they live, right? There's this sense of duty and responsibility. And then there's also this sense of there's only so much you can do. There's a pandemic and you can't control when things come back on, right? So there's a lot of powerlessness in that experience that needs to be honored, and it's a valid experience. It doesn't mean that you are powerless, but the experience to having that sense of powerlessness is a really valid experience when all of a sudden you're hit with a pandemic that's shutting everything down. What do you do? So honoring that's really important, understanding that with trauma, there is often that sense of powerlessness. And with that, there's oftentimes sense of shame. And shame can kind of spiral into that sense of not wanting to be here anymore, those suicidal thoughts. So just kind of tracking that progress, like tracking that transition, right, from feeling powerless to feeling like you don't have control, then perhaps to feeling that shame, like start to notice how you're reacting to each of these experiences, and that's going to give you a leg up. Okay, next one. Okay. So trauma affects our nervous system. Regulated nervous system equals a present nervous system. I think that there's a lot of stuff out there these days about self-regulation and self-leadership and stuff. When I'm speaking about regulation, I mean a neutral nervous system that's able to be present and not in a fight, flight, or freeze response. So when our nervous system feels overwhelmed, when it's hit with too much to take all at once, in a state of trauma, it becomes dysregulated and it goes into variations of fight, flight, or freeze, which is what we know as survival mode. Survival mode is a limited capacity state. That means that when we are in fight, flight, or freeze, we are limited to a fight, flight, or freeze response. We do not have access to our whole self, and we are existing really in a threat response. So one of the things that Lori was talking about was that a lot of these mental health issues were present in the industry prior to the pandemic. And when you're talking about bullying and some of the stuff that you're talking about, you can imagine in a set like that, where there's a lot of bullying and there's the long hours and fatigue and all of these issues that we've always been dealing with in the industry, that folks are going to be in survival mode. And in survival mode, that's a super tricky place to try to be productive, to try to get along, to try to not bully one another or be scared of other people, right? There's a lot of repercussions to having an environment where people are operating in survival mode. Now you have the pandemic and you have this post-COVID or right now really during COVID time of going back on the set. That's a whole other level of survival mode. This is life threatening really at the core, right? So just knowing that is going to be happening on your set, in your companies, where you're located, and being aware that fight, flight, or freeze response does limit people and can affect the overall group. So dysregulation, we end up having coping mechanisms to try to deal with a dysregulated nervous system. The dysregulated nervous system is that overwhelmed system. Again, it's the system in fight, flight, or freeze. That means dysregulated. So when you're in that state, people often try to have coping strategies. Some of them are healthy, some of them are not. And one coping strategy, as strange as it sounds, is these suicidal thoughts. The wanting to end the pain, again, is a really normal response to being super dysregulated, really overwhelmed, and in a survival mode. It's a form of pain management, you can say. So when we look at anxiety and depression through the body, it gives us more ability to work with ourselves versus trying to understand what it is we might be sad about or what it is we might be anxious about. Through the body, anxiety and depression are basically two sides of the same coin. They're different responses to overwhelm. So one is a high activated state. Your nervous system gets that jittery, anxious feeling. It can go into panic. It can go into rage. It can go into wanting to get the heck out of here and run away. The other side of that coin is depression, which is a low activation state. It's kind of like a freeze state. And it can be anywhere from feeling like a total zombie and fully numb to just being kind of separated and checked out of life a bit, unable to get out of bed, that kind of a thing. Tools for anxiety. So again, anxiety, if you can look at it from a body lens, it does really help give more control. So anxiety is, again, high activation. So you can think you want to deactivate, ground. So if it goes up, you want to bring yourself back down. And there are a lot of ways to do this, but they are oftentimes very difficult to implement. So we know that meditation and breath, using your breath, help. Oftentimes we're aware if we can breathe deeply, it can bring our nervous system down. But it's hard to do a lot of these things in the moment. So especially exercise, getting into nature, food and water, all of these things are very, very important. But I always like to specify that it takes work oftentimes to implement them. Because you're in a high activated state, because the anxiety can overtake us sometimes, it's hard to actually transition and bring yourself down. So each time you try, even if it's imperfect, and it will be, that contributes to a different relationship with that anxiety. And it works over time really well to kind of regulate your system and have a different baseline, to have a different place that you're starting with. Tools for low depressive states. So a low is a form of a freeze state. Oftentimes it can be like a sort of dissociation where we're kind of not in our body, that kind of numb, immobile, I don't want to get out of bed, I don't want to do anything feeling, and just like hard to engage with life. So this really requires baby steps. And this is something that I think a lot of folks in the industry have been dealing with. Part of it is that this tends to come on the other side of high anxiety. So oftentimes if we go through like a really hard moment, we have a lot of anxiety rise, there can be this collapse on the other side. And I see this a lot just where people were very used to being traveling a lot on the go, working long hours, and now they're home a lot. So there's all these physical and physiological repercussions to that. So baby steps really important, and be aware that as you work to move yourself out of a depressive state, as you work to move yourself out of low activation, the anxiety might start coming, because part of what we're numbing from is all of that scary stuff, all of that anxiety. So if you can be aware ahead of time, okay, I'm going to start moving my body. It's hard to get out of bed. I'm going to take a little baby step and I'm going to get myself to the kitchen. If you can be aware that that movement is probably going to bring some stuff up, kind of bring that rise of anxiety, and just keep grounding yourself, that's the work. That's going to get you ultimately really out of that state. It's a process. Immediate tools. So those are kind of the ongoing longer term ways of looking at self-regulation, like how you can really work with it over time. But there are immediate tools that you might want to use if something gets ignited in the moment. So say you're on set, you notice, somebody's not wearing a mask and it's freaking you out. It's really scary. You're not feeling safe in the moment. You can feel that rise before it gets into panic, or if it gets into panic. You can use a tool that is called orientation. It seems very simple, but it helps. Our nervous system, when it gets put into threat mode, gets taken out of the present moment. So if we orient ourselves, we look around the room, and kind of check out where we are. Sometimes it helps to name something to yourself. So I'm looking at this basket. It's a woven basket. It's on the top shelf, and you're talking to yourself. It's super weird, I know, but it works. Talk to yourself. It brings your nervous system back to the present moment, because that basket was not in your trauma. The basket is here right now. Definitely don't choose something that was in a traumatic event. You want to choose something that is neutral. It doesn't have an association. Sometimes I tell people to just choose the ceiling, like the corner of the ceiling. That's fine. A plant, it doesn't matter. But the idea of that is to bring yourself out of the past trauma that your nervous system is throwing you into and bring you back into the present moment. So that's orientation. And then when you do that, if you orient yourself and it brings you back and you notice that you have a lot of anxiety still, you can use your grounding breath, a long, slow inhale and a long, slow exhale is like the brakes to your activation. So if you look at the panic and high activation anxiety as go, 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 the breath is like the brakes. So you can do that. If you notice that you're frozen and you're using orientation to get yourself back into your body, to get yourself present again, because you kind of checked out, as you come out of that freeze, you can kind of shake out your limbs and kind of move your body a little bit to just try to bring yourself back, press your feet into the ground, looking around. And that helps to just like bring you back here, bring you back into the present moment. These are things you can try in your daily life also in smaller little bits. So if you start to notice that you're getting anxiety, you can try that. Try to orient yourself around the room and see what happens. See what happens if you use these tools. The more you use them, the more comfortable you'll be when the time is really needed to use it. Allow crying and allow rest. Oftentimes, crying needs to happen, and we have a funny relationship with crying, especially here in the US. And especially in the industry, not to generalize, but especially. So crying from a somatic lens is it's your body regulating itself. It's important. We call it a somatic discharge. It's when some of the trauma response needs to come out. So if you can try to look at it as actually helpful to what you're dealing with, it's healing to cry. And you can do it in your own private time, whatever you need. But if you notice that coming up, please do allow yourself to cry. It definitely does not mean you're weak. It actually means you're strong. It's harder to cry and let the feelings out sometimes than it is actually to freeze and not feel anything and suppress. So it's a great sign a lot of times when somebody is able to cry. That shows that their system is starting to reorganize. They're starting to get better, so to speak. So, and then allow for collapse. Oftentimes we need to rest after we have some of these big fluctuations that happen. And challenge your thoughts. In the immediate moment, if you go into survival mode, trauma says never again. Like if it could have a voice, if your whole system could have a voice, it would be saying, never again will I let that thing that hurt me again. Never, never, never. That will not ever happen again. Trauma is like having the rug pulled out from underneath you. Everything you thought that was okay isn't all of a sudden. So the self-protective response is no, no, no. That looks the same as the thing that hurt me before. I'm never going to let it happen again. So oftentimes that's not true, what's actually happening. It feels the same, but it's not the same. So try to challenge your thoughts if you can. The rational mind does not really function well in survival mode. It goes offline. So if you can try to have something that you say to yourself, like, right now in this moment, I am safe, things are different, but I'm okay, stuff like that, it does help send a signal to your nervous system to regulate and calm. So learning to track yourself is really, really important. It's one of the most useful tools in this kind of work because it allows you to understand what's going on with yourself on a body level and therefore intervene before you either lose control or things feel like too much and you shut down. So tracking yourself just means noticing what's happening in your body. Noticing, does it feel buzzy? Does it feel ungrounded? Does it feel like jittery? If so, you're probably activated. If so, you probably need to ground. Does your body feel numb? Does your body feel like hard to move, lethargic, super tired? So probably that needs some movement there, right? We need to work with that. So if you can start to track what's happening for you, then you're going to have more control over your mental health, really. Exercise and daily movement. These things, all of these things, bookending your days with routines, all of these things. These are ongoing tools that require a process to implement. They are not easy to do when you actually are dealing with trauma. If they're easy to do, you might not have as much trauma as you think, because oftentimes it's very, very difficult to actually be consistent with the things that can help and even just do the things that can help. So really allow yourself a process to work on these things, to add some routine to the morning, to add some routine to the night, to work with your breath when it comes up. It's okay if you don't remember these tools all the time. Just do it when you remember it. Do what you can, and there's a cumulative effect, and it will just keep getting better and better that way. Exercise especially is so helpful, but it also is extremely hard to start if you're in a state of trauma because you're disconnected from your body sometimes. So give yourself permission to take time with it and also not to overdo it. Find what's right for you. And the importance of resilience. So this has been a really hard time for everyone, and a really hard time for folks in the industry. I mean, it's just been like, it can't be understated how difficult it's been. And it's scary to go through this stuff. And it's scary to know that there's people you care for suffering. And it's scary to suffer yourself in ways you maybe have never experienced before. It also can bring up past trauma. So this time of trauma can make it everything that you've already been through feel so much worse or so much harder. but the ability to stop and rest and allow yourself the process to recover, that's resilience. So we need to take that time to take care of ourselves and recover from what's going on, ground ourselves, and then move back out into the world. And then we have to kind of sometimes step back and then move back out. So allow yourself that process of re-engaging and building that resilience. Building resilience builds our capacity, it expands our capacity for life, and it expands our capacity for all these really hard feelings and experiences that this current environment is forcing us to have to hold. And compassion and understanding. This is truly a hard time. This is truly a hard thing that everyone's going through. And so please remember to have self-compassion. There isn't something wrong with you. You're not failing. You're in a tough time. This is a tough time, and there will be another side of it. There always is. And post-traumatic growth is a very real thing that exists. That is a very real thing. So trauma does really hurt us. It fractures us. It's hard. It's overwhelming. And through the resilience that we build, the capacity that we build, we have growth. That's post-traumatic growth. So it really is there, and there is another side. That's it. Thank you.
Taryn, that was absolutely fabulous. And I can tell from some of the comments and the questions coming through that people are really, this is resonating with a lot of people. You know, these simple techniques and recognizing everything that you're describing is phenomenal. I think the timing of this is wonderfully apropos, and I really appreciate you being here today. And this was one of the things I was just going to mention to the audience, and I was searching while you were just talking on that last slide. So here's the two ways in which you can get the information that we've been discussing today. So btshelp.org/mental health, and as well as Taryn's site, which is, I'm not going to say the HTTPS, but mastery.studio. And I encourage anybody to look here and gravitate towards these resources because they're extremely helpful. I cannot thank you both enough for your time today and the amazing work that you're doing and the steering committee is doing on behalf of mental health.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And
yeah, this has been, go ahead, Lori.
We say, just feel free to reach out if there's anyone who would like a presentation for their company, for their local, whatever, just reach out to me and we can schedule something. Happy to do so.
Yeah, Lori, I was kind of reviewing that slide that you had sent me the other day. I mean, you've done this presentation over the last, year or so, 45 or 50 times now, I think.
Yeah. Taryn is able to join me some of the time, not all of the time. It depends on the situation. She is trying to earn her living as a therapist, but I'm certainly happy to do it at any time. It's just a matter of scheduling it. And I do nights and weekends too, and that kind of thing. And so whether it's a part of a meeting or a special webinar, people can just reach out and inquire.
Great. And to answer a couple of questions in the Q&A, this particular presentation today, the PERG Coffee Break, was being recorded, and it will be available in the future on the ESTA PERG website. So you'll be able to go back and review everything that was discussed today. So with that, again, Lori, Taryn, thank you both very, very much. So this is not the last of our PERG Coffee Breaks. We will continue this next week, next Thursday, April 1st, same time frame. We're going to be joined by Tabitha Mason-Elliott, who is the head of production and a partner at Bark and Bark. She is also the chair of the AICP's Equity and Inclusion Committee and is overseeing the implementation of several DEI initiatives across the commercial industry. So we'll be able to hear about the success and challenges of this direct impact initiative and then how rental companies can utilize and benefit from a similar model. So stay tuned in your inboxes and you'll be seeing an opportunity to register for next weekend's coffee break. So with that, again, ladies, thank you very much. And thank all of you for attending today's PERG Coffee Break.